All right, Unit 4, Lesson 16. It's called Transforming and Combining Random Variables. So what we're going to do here is take the probability distributions that we did yesterday, or I should say in the previous lesson, not necessarily yesterday, in Lesson 15, and we're going to take the x values and do stuff to them, like I'm going to increase it by 1, or I'm going to multiply it by 3, and see what happens with those. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is find the mean and standard deviation for these two things here. So if you remember from lesson 15, you take your x values and you put them into L1, and you take the probability values and you put them in L2. Stat, calc, 1-bar stats, L1, L2. All right, so we have 1.6 for the mean and 1.28 for the standard deviation. So here's how I'm going to label those. So for mean, we are going to use the symbol with mu. Looks like an M with a little tail on it. And then because I want to differentiate the difference between these two, I'm going to give it a little subscript there. So the mean of x is 1.6. And then the standard deviation of x is equal to 1.28. And then if I do the same thing for y, the mean for y turns out to be 2.8, and the standard deviation for y is approximately 0.98. You put that in your calculator and see, and if you don't get that, then ask me. Okay, let's say I take the x values and I increase them by 1. So if I go back to my list here, where I had 0, 1, 2, 3, what if I had instead 1, 2, 3, 4? Leaving the probabilities the same. Stat, calc, 1-bar stats. Okay, notice that the new mean is 2.6, so it increased by 1, but the standard deviation didn't change. So this is called A here. So the mean of A ends up being 2.6. That's not a 6. And the standard deviation of A is still 1.28. Okay, so essentially when you add or subtract a number to your x's, it's going to change your mean by that same amount, but your standard deviation will stay the same. Okay, what if I multiply by a number? So let's I need to plug in the numbers for change these here. Okay, so when we did the y stuff, mean was 2.8, standard deviation was 0.98. So those were usually originally 2 and 4. Let's make them now, so multiply them by 3. So 2 times 3 would be 6 for that one, 4 times 3 would be 12 for that one. Oops, sorry, I put that in the wrong list. I wasn't paying attention. So 6 for that, 12 for that. Same two probabilities. Stat, calc, 1-bar stats. Okay, so the new mean is 8.4, which 2.8 times 3 is 8.4. So my mean for B is now 8.4. And my standard deviation, which was 0.98, is now 2.94. Which is also taking this number and multiplying it by 3. So the rule is going to be here, and it's these formulas down here first. If you're adding or subtracting a constant to the mean, you change the mean by that number, but the standard deviation stays the same. If you're multiplying or dividing, however, you're going to change both the mean and the standard deviation by multiplying or dividing by that number. So if I would have changed this one to x minus 5, I would have taken the mean and subtracted 5, and the standard deviation would have stayed the same. If I would take this one and divide by 2, I would have divided this number by 2 and this number by 2. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. All right, then combining independent variables together. So that's these rules down here. So to combine independent variables, you are going to take the two means. Let's say we're adding them together. That's what this question is here. We'll do subtraction next. So I'm going to take the two means and add them together. So I'm going to do 1.6 plus 2.8. So the mean, and then we're going to call that C. So the mean of C is going to be the mean for X and the mean for Y added together. So if you add 1.6 and 2.8, you get 4.4. The standard deviation is going to be the square root of each one of the standard deviations squared and added together. It's kind of like doing Pythagorean theorem. So I'm going to take the mean of this one, which was 1.28, square it, and the mean of this one, which was 0.98, square it, add them together, and take the square root. So just to show you how to put that in the calculator, square root 1.28 squared plus 0.98 squared. So approximately 1.61. And then for subtracting the two distributions instead, and we're calling this one D, I would take the two means and subtract them in the order that it says. You get a negative number, you get a negative number. That's a D. So 1. I can't make a decimal in there. 1.6 minus 2.8. So it's going to be negative 1.2. Notice when you do the standard deviation for adding and subtracting, it's the exact same thing. This does not become subtraction when you're doing it. It stays as addition. So it's going to be the exact same thing as when I did it in the previous one. So that's still 1.61. All right, so that is adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing probability distributions with probability distributions. Lesson 16. So let me know if you have any questions.